The moment I realized my marriage was about to shatter, I was holding a glass of champagne and watching my husband's hand freeze midair as another woman's bare shoulder brushed against his skin. Her name was Vivienne. She moved through the party like silk through water, deliberate and fluid, and when her eyes found Marcus across the crowded room, something in the air shifted. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't innocent. It was a look that carved through pretense and pierced straight into desire, and I felt it in my chest before my mind could catch up with what I was witnessing. The music throbbed low and sultry, each beat threading into my veins like it knew secrets I wasn't ready to confess. I stood there, my pulse quickening, watching as her dress, a deep crimson thing that seemed to defy gravity, slipped just slightly off her shoulder. Deliberate, calculated, devastating. I should have felt rage. I should have marched over and reminded her that the man she was undressing with her eyes belonged to me. Instead, every nerve in my body lit up with something I didn't expect, a forbidden thrill that made my hands tremble and my breath catch. Vivienne's laughter rang soft through the noise, and when her fingers grazed Marcus's arm, a whisper of skin against fabric, it seemed louder than the music itself. His hand twitched at his side, caught between restraint and instinct, and I watched his jaw clench the way it did whenever he was holding something back. I knew I should look away, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stepped closer, drawn by a magnetic pull I couldn't name, until I was near enough to feel the heat radiating from her body when she turned toward me. Our eyes met. Hers were daring, glittering with challenge and invitation. Mine must have betrayed the curiosity trembling beneath my shock because her lips curved into a knowing smile. She leaned in so close I could smell her perfume, something dark and intoxicating, and whispered words I couldn't hear over the pounding bass. But her lips brushed the shell of my ear, and the sensation rippled straight down my spine, electric and dangerous. Marcus shifted behind me. I felt his gaze heavy on both of us, burning through the space between our bodies. Across the room, Vivienne's husband, Julian, watched with an unreadable half-smile that said he knew exactly what game was being played. Perhaps he'd always known. My chest rose and fell too fast. The champagne was no longer the reason my hands felt unsteady. Then it happened. Vivienne's fingers, delicate and deliberate, slipped across mine. The touch was featherlight, but the spark was so sharp I nearly gasped. My heart thundered loud enough to drown out everything except the music's relentless rhythm and the dangerous heat pooling in my stomach. For one breathless moment, time suspended itself. The party dissolved around us until all that existed was touch, eyes locked in silent conversation, and the terrifying thrill of what came next. I leaned closer, the line between teasing and surrender blurring with every shallow breath. But just as our faces drew near, just as I thought I might cross a threshold I couldn't uncross, she pulled back. Slow, deliberate, daring me to follow. Marcus's stare burned into my back, waiting, challenging. Julian raised his glass in a subtle toast from across the room, permission and amusement dancing in his expression. In that suspended silence, with the music swelling to hide every secret it was about to witness, I knew with absolute certainty that the night was about to tip into something I couldn't undo. And the most terrifying part? I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. The night carried on, though my thoughts had long abandoned the clinking glasses and polite conversations swirling around us. Marcus stood near the bar, his posture too rigid, laughing at jokes that didn't reach his eyes. His knuckles were white against his glass. I knew that tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked when he was holding back a storm. We'd been married 7 years, long enough to read each other's silences like poetry, long enough to know when something fundamental was shifting beneath our feet. Our marriage had been steady, perhaps too steady. The kind of rhythm that feels safe at first, then slowly suffocates you if you stop paying attention. We used to stay up until 3 in the morning, tangled in sheets and conversations that stretched from philosophy to foolishness. We used to laugh until our stomachs ached. We used to touch each other constantly, casually, as though our bodies couldn't bear to be separated even for a moment. But lately, our nights had grown quiet. Marcus buried himself in his architectural firm, working late, skipping dinners, falling asleep with his laptop still glowing on his chest. I buried myself in the gallery I managed, in long walks alone, in the growing suspicion that maybe I wanted something more than what we'd settled into. Not more love, exactly, just more life, more spark, more of the fire that used to consume us both. And then Vivienne appeared at this party, thrown by mutual friends who collected interesting people the way others collected art. She was everything I wasn't in this moment, fearless, reckless in her beauty, unashamed of the way her gaze lingered too long on things that didn't belong to her. Julian, her husband, was equally compelling in his own way. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of quiet intensity that made you lean in to hear what he might say. Rumors swirled around their marriage like smoke. Some said they had an arrangement. Others whispered about their parties in the hills, invitation-only affairs where conventional rules dissolved like sugar in rain. Their bond wasn't built on tradition. It was built on mutual indulgence, shared secrets, and a willingness to explore territories most people wouldn't dare approach. I didn't envy their lifestyle, but I couldn't stop being curious about it. About them. About the way they seemed so alive in a world where everyone else, myself included, felt half asleep. The first time Vivienne's hand brushed mine, seemingly by accident as we both reached for the same appetizer tray, I felt more awake than I had in months. It wasn't just attraction, though attraction hummed beneath my skin like electricity. It was provocation. A dare whispered without words, a challenge to step outside the comfortable prison I'd been living in. Marcus returned to my side eventually, his presence heavy and protective. His hand found my lower back, fingers splaying with just enough pressure to remind me I was his. I looked up at him, searching his face, and saw more than possession in his dark eyes. I saw hunger. The kind he used to have for me, fierce and consuming. But tonight that hunger flickered in unexpected directions. Directions that included her. The strangest part? I didn't hate the idea. The thought sent a shiver racing up my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. A part of me, a part I'd never acknowledged before, wondered if this was the crack we'd both been waiting for. The fissure that would either break us completely or break us open into something we couldn't yet imagine. Julian caught my eye then, raising his glass in a subtle toast that seemed to say he understood exactly what I was thinking. There was no jealousy in his expression, only amusement and perhaps permission. As if all four of us were standing at the edge of something inevitable, and he was simply waiting to see who would jump first. In that single suspended moment, with music swelling and the air thick as velvet between us, I realized we were teetering on the brink of something that could either destroy us or transform us entirely. And God help me, I wanted to know which it would be. The party pulsed around us like a living thing, yet every sound felt muffled under the weight of unspoken words and stolen glances. I felt Marcus's hand tighten on my back when Vivienne passed by again, so close I could have reached out and touched the curve of her waist. Her perfume trailed through the air like smoke, curling into my lungs and making my head swim. His grip was subtle but unmistakable. A warning. Whether meant for me or for her, I couldn't tell. Vivienne turned her head slightly, letting her dark hair cascade over one shoulder, exposing the elegant line of her neck. The gesture was effortlessly graceful yet anything but careless. Her eyes slid toward Marcus, then to me, lingering just long enough to make my stomach twist. But it wasn't jealousy in its purest form. It was something darker, more complex. A cocktail of envy and temptation that made me simultaneously want to pull him away from her and push him toward her just to see what would happen. To see if he'd go. To see if I'd survive watching. Julian remained the silent observer, leaning against a marble pillar with the casual elegance of someone who owned not just the room but the very air inside it. His glass tilted lazily in his hand, as though he had all the time in the world to watch this dance unfold. His smirk was knowing, an invitation wrapped in a dare. Suddenly, I wondered if this had all been choreographed long before I'd noticed the game being played. If we were actors who'd stumbled onto a stage with our lines already written. The music shifted, growing slower, more seductive. Couples drifted toward the center of the room, swaying in wine-soaked embraces. Marcus met Vivienne's eyes for just a second, but the air cracked between them like lightning before thunder. My chest constricted as if my heart had stumbled, tripped, and crashed against my ribs. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Couldn't pretend I didn't see what was plainly written on his face. He wanted her. And the heat building in my own veins, the flush spreading across my skin, betrayed an equally damning truth. I wanted her too. Julian finally moved, crossing the room with predatory grace. His shoulder grazed mine deliberately as he passed, and when he spoke, his voice was pitched low enough that only I could hear. "Careful," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "You might enjoy this more than you expect." I froze, every nerve igniting at once. My breath quickened until the room tilted slightly, champagne and desire making the floor feel unsteady beneath my feet. Marcus's arm encircled my waist then, pulling me close against his chest. But even as he held me, his eyes remained locked on Vivienne across the room. And in that clash of gazes, in that unbearable silence masked by music and meaningless chatter, I knew something was about to snap. The kind of snap that shatters glass. The kind you can't piece back together, no matter how carefully you try. The night unraveled like a thread pulled too hard, too fast. The crowd thinned as the hour grew late, laughter echoing from distant corners, while shadows deepened along the edges of the sprawling house. Marcus slipped away from my side with some excuse about needing air, but his voice carried a tremor that told me he was lying. I knew where he was going. I felt it like a rope tightening around my chest, pulling me forward even as my mind screamed at me to let him go, to save myself the pain of witnessing whatever came next. But I followed anyway. I always followed him, even into darkness. I found them in the hallway beyond the main rooms, dimly lit by a single ornate chandelier that cast more shadows than light. His voice was low as he spoke to her, their bodies not quite touching, but close enough that the distance between them felt obscene. The air was thick with words they weren't saying, with desire they were barely restraining. My pulse hammered in my throat. Jealousy and curiosity twisted together like vines around my heart until I couldn't distinguish where one ended and the other began. I should have interrupted. Should have walked straight up to them, inserted myself between their bodies, reminded Vivienne that the man she was seducing belonged to me. Should have taken Marcus by the hand and led him away from temptation. Instead, I stepped closer, silent as a ghost, letting my presence fill the narrow space. Vivienne's eyes shifted to me, and something passed through them that I couldn't quite name. Triumph, perhaps, or recognition, or the particular satisfaction of someone who's proven a theory they'd held all along. Her lips curved into a smile that was equal parts invitation and challenge. Marcus's gaze flicked between us, his breath coming faster now. Tension thickened the air until it felt hard to breathe. His hand twitched at his side as if he couldn't decide who he wanted to reach for first, or if reaching for either of us would be the match that set everything ablaze. Then Julian appeared, materializing from the shadows like he'd been waiting there all along. He blocked the exit with his relaxed posture, leaning against the wall with dangerous calm. His smile curved slowly, knowingly, as if all of us had been walking toward this exact moment without realizing it. "Interesting," he murmured, his tone almost teasing though his eyes remained sharp, watchful, taking in every detail of our trembling tableau. The air crackled with electricity. We stood in a charged square of space where every breath felt forbidden, where closeness felt inevitable as gravity. Marcus leaned toward me, his breath brushing my ear as he spoke in a voice rougher than I'd heard in years. "Tell me you don't feel it too." His words weren't a plea. They were a confession. An acknowledgement of the desire written all over my face, the truth I'd been trying to hide from myself. Before I could answer, before I could even process what he was asking, Vivienne stepped closer. Her shoulder grazed mine, her perfume making my head swim. Her smile was wicked and knowing and utterly unrepentant. Marcus didn't move away. Neither did I. The silence stretched, heavy with choices we could still make, thick with the weight of a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The music from the party swelled faintly behind us, a reminder that somewhere beyond this hallway, the world still turned, people still laughed and danced and lived their normal lives. But our world had narrowed to this space, these four people, this moment balanced on a knife's edge. And then Vivienne reached for me. The hallway held its breath. So did I. Her hand slid against mine with the kind of delicate precision that felt far more dangerous than any overt gesture could have been. Fingers brushing, lingering, pressing just enough to send heat racing up my arm. I didn't pull away. My silence spoke louder than any words. Marcus's eyes widened as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. For a heartbeat, I thought he might step between us, might break the spell with some protective gesture. Instead, he did nothing. Or perhaps he did everything by allowing it to happen. Vivienne's touch lingered, her thumb tracing a small circle against my wrist. The distance between us collapsed until I could feel the warmth of her body, could count each breath she took. My own breathing had gone shallow, unsteady, her lips tilted into the faintest smile. Not kindness, not affection, possession. She wasn't asking permission. She was claiming something she decided was already hers. "You've both been pretending," Julian said from his position in the shadows, his voice even and laced with quiet amusement. "Pretending your marriage is flawless, pretending you don't crave something more than what you have." His gaze shifted to Marcus, sharp and cutting, despite the casual way he leaned against the wall. "Pretending you weren't already meeting her behind closed doors." The words hit me harder than Vivienne's touch, harder than anything that had happened all night. I turned slowly, staring at Marcus, searching his face for denial, for confusion, for anything that would make Julian's accusation false. But my husband's silence was the only answer I needed. The guilt in his eyes, raw and unmistakable, betrayed him more completely than any confession could have. Hunger mixed with shame, desire tangled with regret, and beneath it all, the terrible relief of being caught. My chest burned as betrayal carved deep into my ribs, stealing my breath. Yet beneath the sting, beneath the sharp edge of pain, something else pulsed. Something that felt almost like relief. The truth was finally in the open. "You," my voice broke before I could finish the sentence. The word came out ragged, torn. Marcus didn't deny it, couldn't deny it. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he rasped, running his hand through his hair in a gesture I knew too well, the one he made when he was drowning in guilt. God, Isabel, it wasn't supposed to be anything, but I couldn't stop. Isabel. My own name sounded foreign coming from his lips in this moment. Vivienne's hand tightened over mine, her nails pressing lightly into my skin. "And now you know," she whispered, her tone rich with triumph but also something softer underneath. Something that might have been empathy or invitation or both. I should have pulled away, should have screamed, should have slapped her across that beautiful, smug face and walked out of this house and never looked back. Instead, I stood rooted to the floor, my pulse hammering in my ears, my mind spinning between betrayal and something else. Something I was terrified to name. A fierce, undeniable thrill at standing in this dangerous heat, at being the center of so much raw want and need. Marcus reached for me, not to explain, not to beg forgiveness, but to pull me closer. Impossibly, inexplicably closer to both him and her. His hand found my waist, grip firm and desperate. Julian's smirk deepened. He took a slow sip of his drink, watching us over the rim of his glass like we were a performance staged for his entertainment. "Careful," he murmured. "You might discover this isn't betrayal at all. It might be exactly what you've been needing." The four of us stood in that charged space where truth had torn away every veil, leaving only raw, trembling desire in its wake. Every possible choice felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Step back and everything shatters. Step forward and everything burns. Marcus's hand was warm against my waist. Vivienne's hand was still locked with mine, her skin soft and electric against my palm. Both of them were watching me, waiting for me to decide which way we'd fall. And in that unbearable moment, I realized the most shocking twist of all. I wasn't the one being chosen. I wasn't the prize they were fighting over. I was the one with the power to choose, to say yes or no, to burn this marriage to the ground or forge it into something entirely new. The chandelier light flickered above us as though even it knew the night was about to explode into something none of us could control. The air cracked open, no longer thick with unspoken tension, but trembling with the weight of everything finally revealed. Marcus's hand still gripped my waist, but it wasn't enough to anchor me. The truth had torn a wound too deep for anything to feel steady. "You lied to me," I said, my voice low but edged with steel. The words shook, not from weakness, but from the storm of rage and hurt and confusion building inside my chest. "You looked me in the eyes every single day and you lied." Marcus's face crumpled, shame and regret, and that maddening desire still tangled across his features. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "I swear, Isabel, I never wanted this to happen, but with her, I felt alive again. I felt like myself again." The confession stabbed deeper than the betrayal itself. I understood exactly what he meant because I'd felt the same hollow emptiness, the same slow suffocation of a life gone quiet. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. My chest heaved as I struggled to breathe through the anger igniting in my veins. But beneath the rage, something raw and dangerous stirred, a longing that had been starved for so long I'd almost forgotten it existed. Vivienne watched me with eyes that were simultaneously sharp and soft, calculating and sympathetic, as though daring me to admit I felt it too, as though she already knew I did. Julian finally stepped forward, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a door closing. "At least he told you the truth," he said smoothly, though his jaw tightened slightly as he glanced at his wife. "She never admits anything. She just takes what she wants." Vivienne released my hand at last, but not before dragging her fingers slowly, deliberately down my palm, as though leaving a mark I'd carry with me. My skin tingled where she touched me, heat and ache colliding with the fury still coursing through my chest. I turned to face her fully, trembling with rage and desire warring inside me. "Did you ever think about what this would do to me?" My voice cracked on the last word. "Did you even care?" Her lips curved into a smile that was somehow both apologetic and utterly unrepentant. Every second, the audacity lit fire to my veins. I should have slapped her. Instead, a bitter laugh escaped my throat, surprising us both. At least you're honest. Marcus stepped forward then, desperate now, his composure finally cracking completely. His hand cupped my cheek, his eyes glistening with tears he was too proud to let fall. "Don't leave me," he whispered. "Not like this. I made a terrible mistake, but I still want you, Isabel. I've always wanted you, only you." And suddenly I saw it all laid bare. The cracks we'd been ignoring for months, the longing we'd denied, the fire we'd buried under routine and responsibility, and the comfortable numbness of a safe life. The betrayal was real, yes, but so was the hunger that still lived between us, fierce and undeniable even now. The other couple stood silently, watching, waiting for my decision like spectators at the edge of a battlefield. Vivienne's expression had shifted to something almost vulnerable. Julian's smirk had faded into genuine curiosity. My chest heaved. My heart felt split down the middle between fury and forgiveness, between the temptation to burn everything down and the desperate need to salvage what remained. Then I did something none of them expected, something I hadn't known I was capable of until the words left my mouth. I stepped back, tearing Marcus's hand from my cheek, and said, "If this is the life you wanted, if this is the spark you've been chasing behind my back, then you're going to watch me take it for myself." Before he could respond, before I could crumble under the weight of what I was about to do, I turned toward Vivienne. The music from the party swelled again in the distance, a wall of sound that seemed to cover the sharp intake of breath around me, the tension snapping like a wire pulled too tight. Every eye locked on us. Every heartbeat seemed to synchronize in that moment. The night wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The tension hung like smoke in the hallway, sharp and suffocating, making every breath feel deliberate. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. We were frozen in a tableau of desire and destruction, all of us waiting to see who would break first. Marcus's hand hovered in the air between us, his eyes pleading with me not to cross whatever line I was standing on. Not to let the night end with betrayal as the only story we could tell ourselves. My chest burned. I was torn between the anger that demanded I hurt him the way he'd hurt me and the undeniable truth that I still loved him. That despite everything, despite the lies and the secret meetings and the way he'd touched another woman while I slept alone in our bed, I still loved him with a fierceness that terrified me. I turned toward Vivienne one last time. She stood with her arms crossed loosely, her expression still carrying that sly, daring quality that had drawn me in from the beginning. But as I looked closer, I caught something flicker in her eyes. Something hollow beneath the bravado, a loneliness she tried to bury under confidence and seduction, and the thrill of taking what wasn't hers. For a heartbeat, I understood her completely. She wasn't here to destroy my marriage out of malice. She was here to feel alive, the same desperate search that had driven all of us to this point. The same hunger that made people do terrible things in pursuit of feeling real. But I wasn't hers to take. And Marcus wasn't hers to keep. My hand slipped free from her touch. The loss of contact felt both like relief and like abandoning something I'd never fully explored. I took a step toward my husband instead. Marcus's breath hitched audibly. His lips parted as though he couldn't quite believe I was choosing him, choosing us after everything that had been revealed. "You broke something in me tonight," I whispered, my voice trembling but steady. "You took our trust, and you shattered it because you were too afraid to tell me you were drowning, too afraid to admit you weren't happy." His face crumpled, raw emotion flooding his features. Guilt and shame and desperate, aching love all tangled together until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. "But," I continued, reaching up to touch his face despite everything, "you also made me remember how much I still want to feel, how much I still want to fight for what we built together. And I want to feel it with you. Only you." The words hung in the air between us for a long moment. Then Marcus moved, closing the distance in one shaky step, his arms wrapping around me and pulling me against his chest with enough force to steal my breath. All the walls I'd built in anger, all the defenses I'd raised to protect myself from the pain, shattered under the force of his embrace. I pressed my forehead to his chest, breathing him in. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat synced with mine, a familiar music I'd missed without realizing how much I needed it. Behind us, Julian finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with finality. Then it settled. He placed a hand on Vivienne's arm, gentle but firm, guiding her away from us. She didn't resist. As they turned to leave, she glanced back once, and our eyes met. There was no triumph in her expression now, only a kind of melancholy understanding, as if she recognized that what we had, flawed as it was worth more than any thrill she could offer. Their figures faded into the shadows, rejoining the party in the distance, leaving Marcus and me alone in the golden glow of the chandelier. For the first time all night, the unbearable tension in my chest loosened. I could breathe again. Marcus tilted my chin up, his thumb brushing my cheek as though memorizing every detail of my face. "I don't deserve another chance," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But I swear on everything I am, if you give it to me, I'll never waste it. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." Tears slipped hot down my face, but they weren't entirely bitter anymore. They were complicated, layered with pain and relief and the tentative hope that maybe, somehow, we could find our way back to each other. I leaned into him, my lips trembling as they found his. The kiss was desperate and messy, tasting of salt and champagne and all the words we couldn't say. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd imagined as a girl. But it was ours. Messy and scarred and still burning with the kind of love that refuses to die quietly. We stood there in that hallway for a long time, holding each other like we were the only solid things in a world that kept trying to spin us apart. Around us, the party continued, oblivious to the small death and rebirth that had occurred in the shadows. When we finally pulled apart, Marcus's eyes were red but clear, focused on me with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. "Let's go home," he said softly. Not a command. A question. I nodded, taking his hand. Our fingers laced together, fitting the way they always had, the way I'd been terrified they might never fit again. As we walked toward the exit, passing through rooms full of people who had no idea how close we'd come to losing everything, I realized something important. We hadn't fallen apart tonight, even though we easily could have. We'd been tested by temptation and betrayal and our own darkest desires, and we'd chosen each other anyway. The night air was cool against my flushed skin as we stepped outside. Marcus pulled me close, wrapping his jacket around my shoulders, and I leaned into his warmth. We'd have to talk tomorrow. Really talk about why he'd felt the need to seek something outside our marriage, about the distance that had grown between us without either of us fully acknowledging it. We'd have to rebuild trust brick by brick, and some days it would feel impossible. But tonight, as we walked toward our car under a sky full of stars, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. And beneath the hope, still burning despite everything that had tried to extinguish it, was love. Complicated, imperfect, and fiercely, stubbornly alive. In that kiss back in the hallway, in that moment of choosing each other when we could have chosen destruction, we hadn't just survived the night. We'd found a way to begin again.